So I can almost describe myself as a veteran. But they've been great. The idea obviously is to take political conversations that we might have in the pub and that kind of level in a way, and put them online. So we've had some great conversations over the last few weeks. We've been on the road, went to Liverpool, went to Birmingham, and there's a lot more of that to come. So I'm going to be taking it all over the country. And then also we've kind of focused on particular issues. So we've done one on community organising, which was a great one. We also did one on Tony Benn's politics. We did a fantastic show on anti-racist activism. Now and again, though, what we try and do is report back from the National Executive Committee, and do that in a way which is more informal than, like a kind of a formal report. So the NEC is the kind of major democratic structure in the party outside of the party conference. It's made up of representatives of CLPs, unions, the leadership, and the PLP MPs and so on. So much of it, I'm sure you realise, much of it is a source of frustration, and no doubt Nadia and Howard will tell us about the lengthy meetings that have gone on for hours and hours and hours without end. But also it is important that people understand it and know about it, because basically the NEC kind of oversees the way that the party is run. So tonight is one of those sessions, and I have two members of the NEC who are activists in very different ways and in different roles and in different parts of the movement, but it should be a really interesting session. So firstly, we have Nadia Jama, who was elected onto the NEC for the first time in November last year on the Grassroots Voice slate. She's a trade union and anti-racist activist. She's involved in the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign, and she is a socialist from Sheffield in the People's Republic of South Yorkshire. How are you doing, Nadia?
I'm doing well. Great introduction as ever, Ben. I've got a different co-host. Well, I've got Howard tonight instead of Laura, so hopefully that'll be great, because Howard's a bit of a firecracker, so it should be good.
We're all got something to live up to there, haven't they? Like, that's a start.
And Nadia, what are you drinking then tonight?
So I think I had a rum and coke last time, didn't I? And I've gone for a whiskey and coke tonight. So I'm teaming up stuff for coke at the minute. So I may go on to gin for the next one.
Very nice. So secondly, we have Howard Beckett, who is the Unite Assistant General Secretary for Politics and Legal. He was brought up in Belfast during the Troubles and trained as a solicitor before working for Unite. And he recently declared that he was running to be the next General Secretary of Unite. And Howard has very much become known for his, let's say, straightforward social media content, which I think has certainly livened up Twitter at times. So, Howard, what are you drinking tonight?
I'm drinking a Moretti beer, a good peasant beer from Italy, a fellow Celts. I often describe myself as being half Italian, Ben. It's not true, but I still describe myself as it. And I might boycott the show if anybody ever mixes whiskey with Coke again, Nadia. That's disgraceful.
It's not Irish whiskey.
Oh, okay,
I would never mix Irish whiskey with Coke.
Okay, I'll let you go.
I'm not at all a whiskey connoisseur, but I do drink rum just with ice. So, I wouldn't have Coke with rum either. But So, and by the way, I've got a pint of Punk IPA, but I did have to get 2 cans to fill this up, so I've got a little bit more than a pint. It's shocking, really, isn't it? It's taking liberties with the pint of politics. I just wanted to firstly talk about a couple of things that are just happening. I mean, We are what we're trying to do with these sessions are talking about kind of longer term issues and political structures and all sorts of stuff. But there obviously are things that happen in the news that you just want to pick up on and have a bit of a chat. And I don't know, Howard, if you I don't know, you've seen the stuff from Bristol tonight. I don't know if you quick reaction to that and what's going on.
Well, my quick reaction would be solidarity with the protesters. And, none of us want to see anybody put at risk whenever we're in a COVID pandemic. But the harsh reality for everybody out there is that the government has created this. They've created this atmosphere now. It's not simply the police and crime bill, but also comes in the back of the CHIS legislation. We're hearing reports tonight of the government intervening in Liverpool. And we have an opposition that has been timid in respect of their responses all along the way. So it is inevitable. And especially whenever people have been locked down, it is inevitable after Sarah Everard that people will understand the importance of protest and will want to protect it, because we are playing for big stakes here. This is about our liberties. Nobody should be in any doubt whatsoever that we now have legislation that legalizes crime for the state and then demonizes protests. And then at the same time, you've got government intervening in democratic process in local authority. So we are playing for enormous stakes right here and now. And my message to everybody would be very simple. Don't take it on the chin. It's time to step up and start fighting. And as soon as these regulations come to an end, let's lift the lid on activism and get everybody out in the streets and show the state that we're expecting a different tomorrow than we had yesterday.
Yeah, and Nadia, we're going to talk a little bit more about the specific kind of police reaction to the protests around violence against women later on. But I just wondered if you had any kind of quick reaction to what's gone on today as well.
I think just reiterating what Howard's just said there, sending solidarity, but the sooner we can get out and protest and get, our feet back on the street to this, the better really, because we have, as we've seen, been a bit timid in our response and allowed these things to go through. But it's great that we've got some good socialist MPs who are standing up and trying to fight these bills for us as well. So, yeah, I just can't wait until we can have an opportunity to really get out there and protest against all of this, because it's just shocking, isn't it? And, particularly coming from a Black community, this just means more of the same for us, and obviously other marginalised communities as well.
Feels a little bit, well, more than a little bit, that the government are taking the opportunity to get through some really pernicious legislation, but also the way that it's been handled, the policing and so on, is obviously about sending out a message as well, isn't it?
Yeah, the whole narrative at the moment is about dumbing down on individual rights and dumbing down on collectivism and dumbing down on the right of protest. This really is dangerous territory. And I think, Ben, that you can see it just simply in the reaction to how the COVID laws have been implemented. I would know this obviously because of trade unionist side, but there's been 134,000 complaints to the HSE in respect of unsafe working conditions. In England alone, Public Health has said that there's been over 3,500 incidences of COVID breakouts in the workplace, but not one prohibition notice has been issued by the HSE to an employer. Compare that to individuals, where over 77 individual prosecutions, including people who were at a vigil for Sarah Everard. It's quite disgraceful what is going on at the moment in society, and we have to step up, because if we don't step up, you can be pretty sure what the Tories' agenda is in respect of workers and our class paying for this crisis, when, of course, it should be wealth and big employers and the establishment that pays for this crisis.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I just, I thought it was important to start on that note, because it does give us a context of the things that you're talking about on the NEC as well. But I wanted to move on to that, because these hour-long sessions go very quickly. So Nadia, firstly, last time you were on, I asked you if you regretted standing for the National Executive Committee. Have things got any better? Do you feel like you're making progress?
What was your answer, Nadia? What did you say?
I said I had no regrets, and I still have no regrets, but it's like famous last words, isn't it? But I suppose if we weren't making any progress, we wouldn't have so much hostility towards us. It's like every meeting there's a new way that where we're not allowed to vote, or we can't bring things back to that particular meeting. It has to be another meeting because there isn't enough time. So I think all of these things are done under the guise of this is just how it is, but actually it's because they want to limit the influence that we're having. So we'll continue to dance that dance. I don't see that changing. We're as determined to get our politics and members' voice heard as others might be to lessen it. So we do get wins and we do get amendments on policies and papers, and Howard will say we did, at the last meeting. But personally, I don't want that to be what we're doing. I don't want that to be where members' voices and our socialist politics are lost in this bureaucracy of paperwork. For me, we want our politics at that table. We want to raise the lack of opposition through abstentions. We want to raise the need for party democracy. When there are selections that have just been mishandled by the party, we want to talk about those things. We want to have those difficult conversations about the flag, and we do that. So I'm still optimistic. I still have no regrets. But yeah, it's pretty much same old, isn't it, Howard?
Yeah. And how long have you been on the NEC, Howard?
I went on just after we lost our December general election. Ben, so I went on as Jeremy Corbyn was obviously leaving, stepping down, and we were seeing the end of the rather brief left majority on the NEC. So I've only known these times of discourse and difficulties, really. But it is what it is, isn't it, Ben? I don't think that the wider membership out there have a real expectation in respect of what we can achieve in the NEC. What I think they expect to hear is that we go on to the NEC and we voice what they want us to voice, that we stand up for them, that we punch above our weight, that we take no prisoners, that we call it out whenever we should call it out. Because the reality for everybody, as you know, is that we're winning the argument out there in the wider movement. We are winning the argument. It is the left that is putting forward policies, putting forward agendas, and that's the reason why you have the U-turn by Keir Starmer and David Lammy over the police crime and sentencing bill, not because of any sudden interest in the rights of protest from Keir Starmer. The reality is that it's because we are winning the arguments out there and will continue to do so. And I keep on referencing it, Ben, as soon as the COVID restrictions finish, watch the activity, watch the activism, watch the protests, watch the lid of expectation, hope, and a determination to change society, because I really believe it will come in vast numbers.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things that we're doing, as well as lifting the lid and being that voice, is linking up, the parliamentarians, the trade unions with the left NEC members as well. We do joint statements, and the last one we had was around the recall conference. So we're raising the voice of members in the meetings, but we're also speaking out to the the wider public as well, which I think is really important.
Yeah, and Howard, your role is slightly different from Nadia. So Nadia is there from the CLP section, so she kind of represents ordinary members on the NEC and is a voice for them. You're from the trade union section, so in what kind of way does that change your role, if at all, on the NEC? And how do you get across kind of what are your kind of priorities on the NEC?
Well, I think the priorities are completely the same as Nadia's now. And I think this is one of the areas for me, Ben, that I really wanted to challenge whenever I went on the NEC. This is now an argument about the heart and soul of our movement. Where does our movement go to? And we have to, and my hope is to avoid any repeat of the conference floor a couple of years ago, whenever we had the CLPs up against the trade unions in respect of party democracy. That was actually an issue that was more about us backing what the leadership wanted in respect of the democratic review, rather than falling out with CLPs. But very quickly, because of the way the voting system works in the conference floor, you could see that discourse created. So I really take seriously my role on the NEC has been one to reflect the fact that this is now an ideological argument between left and right. And it's no longer about whether or not you have a trade union cohort and then you have a CLP cohort. We have to be talking about left and right. And we are a left union. Unite is a left union. We're immersed in the politics of the left. We stand on the side of those who are victims of injustice, and we are constantly trying to move the direction of travel and debate and policy to the left. And that's my role very much, is to try and form that link between the trade unions and the membership, and to get everyone to understand that the trade unions, the left trade unions, are about democracy within the party as much as any CLP member. We want to see democracy in the Labour Party, and we want to see this purge of democracy finished as quickly as possible.
That's a really interesting point about breaking down those barriers between the CLP reps on there and the trade union reps, because I think whether it's perception or reality, because it's difficult, isn't it? Because you can't actually be inside those meetings. It'd be interesting if they live streamed them, actually, but that's another issue. Because I think the vast majority of membership, will not see the detail of what's going on in there. There was definitely a perception, and there has been for probably decades, actually, of a different interest from the kind of trade union bloc in there and CLP reps. And I mean, you had some of that even, when Ben and Skinner were on the NEC as well. So it's interesting that you say that you break it down, because I mean, you mentioned that on the conference floor, and the kind of, like a bit of hostility around what the trade unions were doing. And it's very worrying, isn't it, for the movement to have that kind of division?
Well, it is. And we've got to, and I'm sure Natty would think the same way, we have to now bring a coalition of the left together. And that's our responsibility. We, all of us talk about the left uniting and losing its factionalism and losing that internal debate that the left tends to get obsessed with, that echo chamber stuff. But we have to unite, and that is left unions and left membership uniting going forward. And just to give you an example, Ben, I was vice chair of wards, and at the last round of elections, it was another trade union representative who stood against me for the vice chair position. Because obviously it was someone who was standing from the right of the party. It didn't matter the fact that they were a trade union representative. There was no solidarity through Chulo. Angela Rayner voted for the right-wing candidate and not for me. It tells you where it all is. This is now about a fight between the left and the right. And obviously the reason why we'll always win this, it's just over what period of time will we win it, but we will ultimately always win it, is because it's only the left that offers alternatives. It's only the left that offers policies. It's only us that is speaking for working class people and speaking for the left membership and looking to transform society. So we'll always win this argument. It's just it might take a bit of time at the moment because of the wind of travel of the current leadership.
And Nadia, I imagine it's quite welcome to have people like Howard and the other left unions on your side in a way when you're talking about these democracy issues in particular.
Absolutely. Every single, well, not every single, but the left trade unions on the NEC, absolutely. Howard, there's Ian Murray, there's Andy Kerr, Andy Fox, Jane Taylor, Pauline McCartney, Mick Whelan, are absolutely with us, and that is great. We also have obviously Laura for Young Labour and Ella Morrison. So, when we do statements, they are the people that are organising together, and we try to make sure that all of us, are supporting those things. So yeah, it's absolutely essential. We know that we're the minority in terms of, the number of votes that we have, but as Howard said, we punch above our weight, and we have solid solidarity, which is so important.
There's not a single silly coy amongst us, Ben. If I could just say that, just to get that out in the open.
I was going to ask about that. I will do in a minute. Okay, so Nadia, what are the kind of the issues that you've been discussing for the? You had a meeting last Thursday, I think it was, like a full NEC. Is that right?
Yeah, we had the org committee. So a lot of the stuff that we were talking about, and this is a bit like a report back, I guess, this element, but you know, finally the Black, Asian, minority ethnic structures have been signed off, so that members, for the first time since the democracy review almost 3 years ago, we now have that structure to allow us to organise within the party. So we'll be able to have regional groups. There's going to be a conference that'll give us the opportunity to do rule changes and policies to the main conference. And I think, you know, we got everything that we were we got most of what we were asking for. We did one member, one vote. For delegates, we didn't get that. We argued against BAME Labour having voting rights, which is a real shame because, you know, we do feel that that is a moribund organisation, but it had been pivotal as a black section in the 80s, and that's how we ended up with Diane Abbott and Bernie Grant. So, you know, that although there's been some real wins on and actually getting that structure into place, there's still some work to do there. There's been a number of codes of conduct that have been proposed, one on Islamophobia. There's going to be one on anti-black racism, which is a conversation the party absolutely needs to have, and I'll be involved in that, working with black MPs and other groups. I've been working with Belle Ribeiro Addy and Clive Lewis with Runnymede to see how we can get a definition, and again there'll be wider stakeholders that will be involved in that. There's going to be a policy development review looking at the relationship between the National Policy Forum, the party conference, and how we formulate the manifesto. So that is one we'll definitely be keeping a watching brief around. I think the other thing that came out of the last meeting was the formation of the Gypsy Roma Traveller Working Group, you know, to help develop and define an anti-racism and discrimination for those communities, and thankfully Laura and Andy Fox are going to be involved in that, because that is much needed as well. And we've all been really clear that it's the communities that need to be represented in front and centre of that. And then I think the other thing that we talked about was Recall Conference, which obviously, as you will be aware, you know, we weren't expecting that to be on the agenda, but it was actually on the agenda of the Org Committee. And, you know, this is something that Model Motion has been going through lots of branches and CLPs. And we absolutely took the opportunity, because it was on the agenda, to suggest that the NEC took a vote on that. You know, this is a constitutional request from the membership. I proposed that, Laura seconded it, but we were refused, unfortunately. And, you know, we were told that it could only be noted, which was really disappointing. You know, Laura then asked, well, you know, what do members need to do to be listened to? And then you'll be aware, and we'll probably talk about that a bit later, but, you know, there was an incident that appeared in the media which was totally unacceptable, and we made our voices definitely heard around that, and particularly Howard as well. And I just think, you know, when people start resorting to name calling, you know, they've lost the argument. So there's lots of other stuff as well that's going on. Obviously, we talked about Liverpool, we talked about Glasgow Kelvin. I'm sure at the next meeting we'll be talking about Hartlepool as well.
Yeah, and just to clear up one thing, because they might be kind of misinterpreted, but the kind of restrictions on BAME Labour voting rights and so on. Can you just explain a bit more about that? Because obviously it could be seen as, you know, that you're stopping a perfectly good organisation and voice of black members in the party being heard.
Well, it's an organisation that I have tried to join for years, and if you speak to lots of black comrades, they will tell you the same. It's very difficult to find out who runs it, how it's organised. We asked a number of questions at the NEC that weren't responded to. So I think we acknowledge that it has got a history, you know, a rich history for black members, black and Asian members, and politically black members. But I think it has fallen into a bit of a defunct organisation. And I think what we wanted was, at least as a compromise, maybe that voting rights were not given immediately, but, you know, 12 months afterwards, so that we've got an opportunity to kind of get a bit more democracy into that organisation. And that's all we were asking for, really. And I think that, you know, lots of people feel like that about BAME Labour.
Yeah. Anything to add to that, Howard, on issues that have been discussed?
No, and Nadia has covered it. Obviously, the two very contentious ones. Well, it was a number of very contentious ones, but obviously the conference is particularly contentious and falls into a real debate about what is the role of the NEC. You know, if you do put the rubric aside and all the rest of the paraphernalia that is created by apparatchiks whenever they're trying to take a hold of organizations, if you put all of that aside, everybody would consider that in the absence of conference, the NEC is intended to be the parliament of the Labour Party. And the idea that people who sit within that parliament can say, we would like a vote on whether or not conference is recalled because we are in a moment of crisis. We're in a moment where our membership is leaving in the tens of thousands, literally, Ben, 70,000 members leaving, disproportionately young people, disproportionately BAME. And we're in a moment of existential crisis where unions are debating their relationship with the Labour Party. The Labour Party is going off to be a party of the establishment. I was very pleased that my General Secretary, Len McCluskey, used that phrase today, that Labour is becoming a party of the establishment. The members are losing heart in respect of it. And you have a large cohort, it's a minority, but a large cohort of NEC members who want to debate whether or not it is here and now that conference should be recalled in order that members can reassert their voice within the Labour Party. And you're told that, no, you can't even have a vote on it. Now, obviously, we knew that we would lose the vote on it because we do not have the numbers, but the idea that you shut down debate in the parliament of your party is just quite extraordinary, regardless of what subsection 2B says in some rule somewhere. It is simply quite extraordinary that you would even do that. The only other thing that I would add to it, and two other things that I would add actually, because I don't know if you want to deal with the Margaret Beckett comment now, Ben, it's up to you, but if you do, I'll be giving you my views, that's for sure. But the first thing is that there is also a code of conduct that's being proposed for NEC members themselves. And we need to be extremely careful in respect of that as to whether or not that's intended to be an NEC code of conduct. I myself have had various tweets put out by Nick Forbes about me that have been completely unacceptable, but I've not made an issue of it. Is that intended to be a genuine code of conduct, or is it in fact intended to shut down people like Nadia and myself who want to pass our opinion in respect of how the NEC has voted? Are we supposed to toe the line after the NEC and not tell people how matters were conducted? Because frankly, if that's the intention, then they can write all the code of conducts they want. I won't be taking any notice of them. And then obviously there's the issue in respect of Margaret Beckett, and Margaret Beckett did reference Laura as a silly cow. And she referenced Laura as a silly cow within the context that I've just described, namely Laura saying, what is the role of the NEC if we are not even allowed to cast a vote in respect of these motions? How do we explain that to the members, that their motions come into the NEC and are simply noted, never even debated, never even voted upon? How do we explain that to the members within what we refer to as a democratic party? And Margaret Beckett thought that was sufficient to reference Laura as a silly cow. Now, she immediately apologised, but if I'm being brutally honest in respect of it, Margaret was apologising because she left her camera off mute, because the idea that she at 1 second thinks that Laura's a silly cow and then the next second thinks otherwise. Well, we're all in the real world. She was apologising because she had been caught out, and it wasn't just the words that were used, which are gender-based, discriminatory, insulting, and unsuitable for anyone to say, let alone the chair of the NEC. It was the manner in which she said it. There was an aggression within it, and a dismissal of it, a classness in respect of the comment, like I know better than you do, that type of reference. And I'll be dead brutally honest, Ben, as far as I'm concerned, I immediately called for her to resign as chair of the NEC, and I'm not going to resign from that. She should be stepping down as chair of the NEC immediately. If she has any decency in respect of her own worth, she will reflect on that, understand that that is not the comment that you can make, and you have to take the consequences of making such a statement. She should be stepping down from chair.
And one of the issues around that is the broader context as well. So, I mean, I think that's a shocking situation, but it's not been an isolated incident either, has it? And there's a general attitude, and I think this. I mean, I've seen it obviously more online than and on Twitter than I have done, within the type of meetings that you're talking about. But a kind of dismissal of people in that kind of way. So there's a culture thing, isn't there, as well within the party, and maybe within certain parts of the party as well, that can do these things with impunity. And have you noticed that as well, Nadia?
Yeah, I mean, I there's been complaints that have gone in around, the same person actually, and their attitude towards me. So yeah, we see it in the meetings. Like Howard said, it's definitely a dismissive. What are these people going on about now? Why do we need to explain things to them? But I think the question that Laura asked was because of the inconsistencies that we see. So the previous org meeting, and I wrote to David about this afterwards, we'd had a motion that had come to the NEC in November that hadn't been dealt with, that was actually from my CLP. We raised it and it was actioned. So motions do get acted upon, and then we've, something that maybe they don't want to deal with because they know what the outcome would be, that they chop and change, and I don't think that's acceptable. And I just think the attitude and the hostility that we've all faced, all of us. I mean, Howard's had his mic muted, we've been told to stop, we've literally been told to stop. I don't think shut up's been used yet, but we are literally shut down the minute we try to speak. So yeah, that's been from the get-go, hasn't it, Howard, since we came on?
Yeah, it has. I was on another event not that long ago with Mish, where he was talking about, we think one of the questions is about this conflict between left and right, and obviously in regard to the various motions that CLPs have been shut down for in respect of making debate. And he was making the point, which I tend to agree with. I don't ever recall being in a meeting where I'd seen somebody in the left conduct themselves in this type of aggressive, undemocratic fashion, this I know better fashion. But I have to say, some of the commentary that I've heard recently from the right seems to be almost entirely premised on this. And if I was giving advice to the right wing of the party, which obviously I'm not, it would probably be something along the lines of you're almost in danger of making yourselves into some type of ultra cult. You're starting to sound nothing but oppositionalist to the left. Whatever the left says, you have to oppose, and you have to oppose it in the most aggressive of fashions, as almost as if you despise us for our politics. And that is very dangerous territory for them. It really is very dangerous territory, Ben, because the passage of time will run out for them. They'll find themselves in front of the members, find themselves in front of conference, find themselves in front of an electorate, and they'll realise very quickly that nobody's interested in that. People are interested in policies, and they're interested in socialist policies.
Mm. I mean, I think the politics of this is really quite interesting as well, because this is really about democracy, isn't it? And I think when you were talking there about code of conduct, Howard, the kind of ulterior motive, the kind of underlying message here is about stopping people like Nadia, Laura, and so on from voicing the views of the membership and doing their job essentially. But then there's also another element, which is reporting back and giving, because that's part of the democratic process as well. And I know I keep mentioning Tony Benn. I'm reading Tony Benn's diaries all over again, for third time, I think it is. But one of the fantastic things about Tony would he would like literally have an argument for a half an hour on the NEC about the right to report a conversation, and this was 30 years ago, or whatever, or 20 years, 30 years ago. And I know he used to do the same thing in the shadow cabinet, and he would insist that the report, the minutes would say that there had been a debate, and they would try to say no, there hasn't been a debate, and he would see it as a major victory just to get on record that there had been a debate about.
Oh well, we had that. We had that this time round. The minutes were challenged by Laura, who wanted it inserted in there that this doctrine that was coming down about what you could debate, what motions you could debate, was being applied without equality, because obviously you were getting some CLPs putting through motions that were supportive of the EHRC, and some that were getting suspended for being negative about the EHRC. So how could any of them be allowed to debate under the doctrine of the General Secretary? And Laura made the point that the minutes should have been reflecting that argument, and quite extraordinarily, the logic seemed to be, yes, but we don't really want the minutes to reflect that argument, do we? We just need to know it ourselves.
I mean,
which is just incredible.
Yeah, we've started to ask for things that we say to get minuted, because fundamentally paying members should see what is being discussed and debated. It's their party, and I think we raised at the last meeting again about, because there's been pre-agreements that minutes would be released onto the portal for members, and that still hasn't happened. And we were told actually they'll look into that, and it might just be decisions that are made rather than full minutes. But we do give our report backs, but members should be given these. It's their party. They're paying for this party to exist. They are, campaigning for these MPs to be elected. Why aren't they able to see what is being discussed? And I know there might be some, key electoral information that they would want to keep, separate to that. But why not? It's the members' party, and it's just outrageous that we have to fight to even add things that were actually said. And if they were minuted, then we wouldn't have to have the discussions and the debate about what was agreed from the last meeting. So, it's, yeah.
Now, obviously, from a trade union point of view, Ben, like I'm on there as a representative of my union. I have to report back to my General Secretary and to my Executive Council. I can't not. The idea that I could go on the NEC and say, sometimes I have to say Margaret Beckett reports back on me before I get a chance to report on myself. But anyway, that's another story.
Nadia, in the context of all that, so a kind of shutting down in a way of your voices on there, and the marginalisation of kind of left voices that we've seen outside of the NEC as well. What's the scope? I suppose this goes back to my first question a little bit, but I don't want to be too negative about it. But I know that people will be asking the question, like, what's the scope for challenging, and holding the leadership to account in that kind of situation for people like you, Laura, and the rest of the grassroots voice reps on there?
Yeah, I mean, as we've just said, it's a difficult one at times, but we do get to raise questions, and points from members direct. We bring, the outside into that NEC bubble at every opportunity that we get to do that. And we give the leadership, I think, a view that is not actually hearing, and that's Angela as well. That they're in their own bubble and they're not actually listening or hearing the stuff that we're seeing. So, in the last meeting, Howard talked about the challenges of organising, the trade union members to go out and campaign, and obviously we've talked about that from a CLP perspective. So we do try to bring that in meetings. We do emails, phone calls. I had a 15-minute conversation with David Evans after the Liverpool issues. So, and we release statements as well. So I think, but the real leverage is the membership. It's imperative that members stay in the party, because they are our kind of greatest asset to wielding that kind of influence over what happens. And I know it might not always feel like that, but the leadership know where the power remains within the party. They know that the party is still predominantly left, and that's why we feel our democracy is being taken from us, and why things like the recall conference are ignored, regardless of the fact that it's a constitutional right for members to request it. The leadership know where the power is. And we've just got to keep voicing that as much as we can and bringing, but organising outside of the NEC and organising outside of Labour, which is what we do with other trade unions as well. So I think that for me is the biggest thing that we can do, really, to try and influence. And we've seen that with, statements that we've done on education. We just have to keep going, I think. But we need the members to stay in the party. And I know it's really frustrating for members. And I know the attacks on members, and, it can be really challenging. But, I'm sure Howard will have a lot more to say about that as well.
Well, one of the things that worries me sometimes, because of the kind of social media world that we now live in, which I've been a big advocate of, and we probably wouldn't have had Jeremy Corbyn in the position we are without it. But one of the things that I think is kind of a little bit concerning about it is that it's very public when people leave now. So they leave the party, and and people can make quite a big statement of leaving and so on. And I can understand why people are doing that. I think we probably all can, but it also it generates a kind of negativity as well, doesn't it? Which is, again, like, understandable. But I just wondered about the actual figures of people leaving, and I suppose importantly, because the people staying as well. So are there still, a core group of, like, as you say, that the party is still left? I mean, that is right, isn't it? If you know that would put.
Oh, it's definitely right, isn't it? Sorry, Nadia. I don't know if you want to take this first or. It was the NEC before last, Ben, that the figures were reported on, and as I recollect, it was just shy of 70,000 that had left. I think I'm right in saying that it was disproportionate to young people and to BAME communities. I saw some commentary from Luke Kirst recently in regard to he was trying to give an explanation for that, saying, yes, you have some hardline Corbynistas who've left, but you had plenty of people who joined for Keir Starmer, and therefore the figure that we're now at, I think he quoted 515,000, is still makes it an overwhelming number of people who are within the Labour Party, and that gives us the troops to move forward. And I think that logic is probably, we still are a party of over 500,000. It's extraordinary. We're still the largest socialist party in Europe. But if Luke Kirst or anybody else thinks that membership has moved to suddenly become right wing, then he needs to check what he's drinking on a Sunday night, because it has not. And we know it's not. We're getting feedbacks everywhere, aren't we, in respect to CLPs that are in dispute. And the reality is that the majority of the CLPs are very much on the left, and you occasionally get some where it's balanced between the left and the right. But I do not hear of many where there's a right-wing majority. The membership is overwhelmingly left, and that's why, as Nadia's referenced, that's why ultimately the power is with us, because it will be that at some stage this party post-COVID will return to democracy, and it will be accountable to the membership, and the membership will be expecting socialist policies.
And Nadia, do you see that as well? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have seen a disproportionate number of young members who got involved because of the socialist agenda that we've seen over the last 5 years. But we're also seeing members that have been in the party 30 plus years, saying that this is it, and they're out. But disabled members are going, and I just think we've got to, on the left, working together, we've got to try and give the membership something to stay and fight for. And I think that's why we're all working together, so that we can do that, and hopefully give people some inspiration to stay. But it's interesting, isn't it, because I think in the last meeting, I think it was Luke that said basically, you'll just have to do what we've done over the last 5 years, just sit back and wait for things to change, and that is what a lot of the right of the party did. They sat back and waited for their opportunity. And I know that can be difficult for people because there's financial implications of staying a member, but I think if our time will come, and it may come sooner than people realise. So I think we just need to make sure that people understand that the power is with them. Conference is coming up, so we've got an opportunity to fight on the conference floor for the policies that we want back and, you know, we want developing. So it's definitely worth people staying, but I absolutely understand the frustration and why people do leave. And we've got lapsed members, so you know, the numbers can change, people can get reinvigorated. And I think what we've seen recently with some of the, you know, the younger MPs like Zara Sultana and Bell, you know, it gives people something, doesn't it, to say it's worth staying and fighting and supporting people like that. So, you know,
I think the reaction to the scenes at the protest with Zara and Bell were just you know, really, you could see it, like people immediately lifted by that, weren't they? And the speech, the Bell speech in particular.
Yeah, absolutely.
Howard, just a couple of things. And you've already kind of talked a bit about how you see a kind of breakdown of the kind of opposition that there might have been around the left of the party and the left unions, and trying to break, you know, trying to you know, forge links across the left. And I think, you know, that's been an enormously positive thing. I just because we've discussed it, you know, when we talked about some of the PPC candidates, the parliamentary candidates came on and talked about it from trade union activists that have been on, that there's a kind of, there must be some pressure on you to say, why is Howard talking about the Labour Party again? Why is he why is he making these kind of interventions, these, you know, enormously political interventions? He should be talking about, you know, the industrial issues. I mean, I don't mean just on the NEC. I mean, more generally, do you get some of that pressure, or you brush that off, or do you think it's so important not to go down that route?
Well, you know, my immediate response to that sort of analysis, if you like, is that these are questions that we asked ourselves within the trade union movement over 100 years ago, whenever we decided that it was essential to form a political party, because of course workers' voices needs to be heard in the corridors of political power as well as in the workplace. But I think I do hear the narrative, Ben. It's a narrative that suits some people. It's wrong and it should be rejected. And it should be rejected as a narrative for a number of reasons. First of all, because politics is all around us. It's in everyday life. And it's our responsibility as leaders to talk to people about how politics affects their everyday life. The reality is that you have a boss in a workplace who tells workers to swallow inflation, gives them the minimum wage while they're taking home millions of pounds. You have the inequalities of society through the likes of Amazon and Google and others because of the politics of the world that we live in. It's a simple reality for us that we have to address the political climate at the same time as winning the industrial battles. It's also wrong because the union is big enough and powerful enough to have an impact everywhere. Any analysis within Unite, for example, it says that one thing is at the expense of another is just wrong and deflects from the role that Unite plays within society and plays within the left movement. And that's true everywhere, up and down our nations. I think a better argument is whether or not we are all too focused on Westminster politics, including the unions, including the leadership of the unions. Should we be concentrating now on a debate as to how we can federalise politics, how we can take it out into regions, how we can form a debate around assemblies, how we can form a debate, for me personally, around proportional representation? That's a personal view of mine. How can we tackle the Scottish question? Is it through federalism? Where ultimately should the power of politics lie? And we all know it should lie within our communities. But I fundamentally reject it because of the reality that everything that we do is linked. Education is linked, industrial is linked, politics is linked. And it's whenever the union operates, not in silos, but in joining all of those things up together, that we're successful. And I suppose, Ben, one example I give to people constantly, obviously, everyone will know that I was heavily involved in 2 bin disputes in Birmingham a couple of years ago, and it was a Labour council that I was tackling head on in respect of that. But I always do say to people after those 2 disputes that, you know, Unite will find itself in perpetual dispute with Birmingham City Council over waste. until such time as we find one of our members in waste who wants to go on and become the councillor for waste, because that's the reality of working class struggle and working class movement, that you have to find the champions in your industries to then take up the positions in the politics. And that's the way ultimately that we'll win our battle for justice. It won't be by operating in silos.
Nadia, I mentioned already the protest over violence against women and the Sarah Everard vigil and so on. The Labour Party, partly, as Howard said before, moved from what looked like a position of abstention. Anyway, it was reported anyway that they were going to be recommending abstention on it to kind of more tentative kind of opposition to it. We're still to see how that will work out, but I mean, is that something to celebrate? You know, or should we worry that was ever the position?
Well, I suppose celebrate isn't a word I would use, because I think, you know, the political stance of abstain is mind-boggling, really. You know, as a party of the workers and trade unions, I mean, this police crime and sentencing bill will affect the very communities that are already disproportionately affected by repressive policing. So, you know, we know that the police don't need more powers, and we know that giving them more powers won't stop violence against women and girls. You know, that's a whole societal change needed before we even come close to that. And, you know, and this bill actually doesn't even come even close to tackling how the criminal justice system would deal with those matters. So I think, you know, it's worrying that we even considered, if we did, you know, because this bill would criminalise the gypsy and traveller communities. I think there should be no celebration, but thank God we've got MPs like Bell, you know, put forward an amendment, and Zara, who spoke on it, and Apsana, because, you know, we need MPs like that fighting on our behalf to kill the bill. And, you know, our collective process has delayed, obviously, the implementation of it, but we have to really stay alert. So I think, you know, I want to quote Diane Abbott really on this, because, you know, when she said back in 2015 to Keir that the only way to vote against a bill is to vote against the bill, abstentions don't count, you know, that was sound advice, and it's still relevant today. And I would hope that Keir and the new leadership would take heed of that.
And Howard, what did you think lay behind that kind of approach from the party? You know, that kind of abstention on something that, you know, seems so obvious, really.
Well, you know, I have it on good authority. It was given to us in a sort of semi-official way that that the position of Labour was that they were planning to abstain on this, and I'm told that David Lammy addressed MPs and referenced that there were many good things within this legislation. Now, obviously, that is the way that you present legislation. You throw a few toffee things out there at the same time as giving the big picture. And the big picture, obviously, that people should have been aware of is this move to criminalise a nomadic existence, and then obviously protests, which is dangerous totalitarian legislation. And I take the view that there is, you know, I suppose you could reference it, and if you were looking to be as inclusive as possible, you could reference it and say the Labour change of heart to vote against this bill is to be welcomed. I suppose that's as strong a language as you could use, Ben. I certainly couldn't use celebrate. And I tell you why I couldn't use celebrate, for two very good reasons. First of all, because this Labour leadership is in danger of just looking for the weather each morning that they get up instead of actually leading. And in a moment of, it's, you know, there's no argument for me that opposition is just about allowing the passage of time until you get to a general election. I don't believe that that's the role of opposition in a democracy, but it's certainly not the role of an opposition at the moment of crisis. You're supposed to step forward and lead and offer alternatives and expose what is going on in society. And nobody should ever look at this police crime and sentencing legislation in absence of CHIS and the overseas crime, whatever it was called, where we were allowed to torture overseas, but not in this country any longer. But the CHIS legislation with this legislation is absolutely pernicious. It means the state can commit crime, but we can't even go out and have a protest any longer. It's extraordinary that the Labour leadership should need any time whatsoever to reflect on it. And I want a Labour leadership that wants to lead, that wants to go out and charge our membership with challenging over what the issues to debate are, and wants to be the person that talks from principle. But the second reason, Ben, as to why this is very, very dangerous is because I get the impression that everything that Labour approaches now is within this context of wanting to present themselves as patriotic, wanting to present themselves as on the side of the establishment, on the side of the police, on the side of the security forces. It's the reason why we're running out of flags. There's more flags than on the Falls Road. It's extraordinary how many flags are being put up on speeches at the moment. And it's within that context that the Labour leadership has said, oh, well, we're thinking of abstaining in this because we can't be oppositional to it, because this is, at the end of the day, a bill that gives the police additional powers, and we can't possibly present us as a party that is against the police having additional powers. And that's all to do with this nonsense over new leadership and this obsession with the previous leadership, instead of talking about policy and talking about what's right in society. So I find it extremely dangerous that we have a Labour Party now that seems to be rushing to be a party of the establishment, does not want to be the party of workers or of democracy, and certainly of socialism.
And I mean, I think that the key thing is as well, it's not working for us. We're behind in the polls. So, we've got to do something different. We've got to stand up for something, because at the minute, it isn't working. Whatever they think would work isn't working. So, yeah, they just need to change. Because I have to say, I don't think for a second this abstention would have ever been considered by the previous leadership. That would never have entered Jeremy's head to consider doing it. And I think we need to get back to that, personally.
So, I mean, I remember us having this discussion before, Nadia. I can't remember if it was actually on this kind of program or whether it was in private, but we there is a sense that when you challenge things like flags and nationalism and the paraphernalia, and you talk about the royal family, and you challenge anything like the national anthem or anything like that, that you're playing kind of student politics almost. And actually what you can see here is that there's a very logical progression, isn't there, from that kind of symbolism. And it happened with Ed Miliband as well. I mean, he flirted with blue Labour and all that kind of nationalism and so, which I think was a disaster actually for him. I think whether it actually ended up losing the election or not is a matter for debate, but it did not work, as you say. But I think in a way that's why it is important to challenge some of the kind of symbolism and so on, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, apart from the fact that the points that you made around, racism and how it feels to be an ethnic minority person and watching that.
I mean, I said that to Keir direct. I said, when I see the Union Jack, and I think I said this on the show the last time, there is no black in the Union Jack, join the National Front, just instantly comes. And it's like, people in Scotland will have a different perception of that Union Jack. People in Northern Ireland will. And Keir hadn't thought about it. I mean, he did say, ring me and have a conversation. He hasn't yet. But it hadn't entered his mind to think that some people might be offended by that, or concerned, or have a different take on it. And I think that's what's missing at the minute from the new leadership, just that lack of understanding around those types of things. And I think that's why it's important that they hear from me, they hear from Laura, they hear from the rest of the GB5 and the trade unionists that we have in the NEC, because we're the ones that are telling them those things, and we're the ones that are bringing those arguments from the outside into the NEC, because, like I said, not even considered that anyone could possibly have a different view than him on what that Union Jack flag would mean. And it's mind-blowing.
Yeah, I agree, Nadia. And this reference to it being student politics is quite insulting, really. It's insulting to Nadia in respect of her feelings about the Union Jack, and there ain't no black in the Union Jack. And, I obviously come from a background, Ben, where flags are the go-to whenever you want to create tribalism. And nationalism, and patriotism is dangerous. The idea that people don't understand that it leads to xenophobia, and then xenophobia leads to racism, and then racism leads to fascism. If people don't understand that connect, then they don't live in the real world and they don't study history in respect of it. So Nadia is absolutely spot on that nobody did an analysis of this. How, Clyde Cymru's come back in respect of Wales. Well, who had the discussion with Wales before surrounding yourself with Union Jacks? Answer: nobody. Scotland, where we are immersed in the difficulties of Indo-Ref 2, who had a discussion in Scotland before we decided to wrap ourselves in the Union Jack? Answer: obviously nobody. But the real danger here is that we are creating this type of society where the right is constantly moving further and further to the right. And by that, I mean that whenever Labour starts talking in this manner, and whenever Labour starts immersing itself in flags and the parties of the establishment, that's whenever you see the Tories getting away with the real racism. That's whenever you get the likes of Dominic Raab able to say that the Black Lives Movement is restlessness, and Priti Patel calling them hooligans, and then Boris Johnson talking about white working class boys having to have their views reflected in any analysis of racism. This is an extraordinary situation where now the party of government is, in any other country in Europe, would be considered a nationalistic party. It would be considered the equivalent of BNP. If it was sitting in France at the moment, Marine Le Pen would have nowhere to go to with her agenda. And that's what you create whenever you allow the narrative to shift and shift and shift like that. And Labour should have no truck with this at all. It's got nothing to do with class politics. It's got nothing to do with working class issues. It is a distraction, but it's worse than that. It's dangerous in our society.
We sort of got to the end of our hour, but there's I'm just checking, Howard, that you're not rushing off to another meeting now.
No, I've still got half a bottle. I brought 2 bottles, Ben. So
You normally are, but I just wanted to ask a couple more things, actually. One thing was really about what's next down the line on the NEC front. So Nadia mentioned before, Howard, about selections and obviously the situation in Hartlepool. Are you able to raise that, and how can you raise that within the NEC?
Well, we've all put our names to a letter that has gone into David Evans that obviously is intended to be an open letter. It's gone to the rest of the NEC as well. Referencing the comments of Paul Williams. Those comments are around women that he's made, the well-known tweet. I won't even repeat it in respect of Tory women. That's quite extraordinary. He also is said to have liked a video that was disparaging of Diane Abbott. And then obviously he referenced Saudi Arabia as if it was suddenly a country that we should all embrace at the same time, whenever we know of everything that's going on towards women in Saudi Arabia. And we obviously all know of the atrocities that are happening in Yemen. So what's happened here, where you have a long list of one, is just an insult to the democracy of the Labour Party, an absolute insult. Only worsened in my mind by the ridiculous commentary that's coming out of Peter Mandelson, who frankly, should be well consigned to the annals of history within the Labour ranks. He seems only to have commentary that is in some way negative and the same type of nasty language that you would expect. You're hearing nothing from him whatsoever in respect of a vision for a better society. His vision for policy right here now, Ben, is that we should get discussing it. Well, this is the message for Mandelson and his ilk. We've been discussing policy now consistently for the last 5 years, and it's the policy that ignited the country and ignited young people and took us to the touching distance of number 10 in 2017. And those will be the policies that will return Labour to power, not your neoliberal light agenda that you can't wait to get back to.
And Nadia, the lessons from the Corbyn years, I think a lot of people feel, is that we hadn't gone far enough in democratizing selection and so on. And obviously we've had a whole debate about open selection and things. But this rowing back towards, like the old way of doing things, that wasn't necessary, was it? And I don't understand where where that is going, because I mean, I made this point the other day. If people don't feel part of something, if they don't feel like they've had a say on something, why? It's very hard. It's a leap, isn't it, to get them then to campaign for it. So it seems self-defeating, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think at the minute, what are we campaigning on? I don't think we're really clear. We had, the nurses asking for 15%. We had the RCN asking for 12%, and we weren't really asking for not even 5% that was in a manifesto of 2019 that a lot of our MPs were elected on. So it just seems bizarre that I don't know what is our give at the minute. What is it that we want people to buy into us as a party? And I think the manifestos, both of those manifestos would have been transformational for people in Britain, and we just need to build on them for the crises that we've got now. And to hear that it was the worst disaster, and that those that those manifestos were rejected, for me, is just not the truth. It is not the truth. People want those policies. People need those policies. We were talking about just yesterday about the inequality and the pandemic. The businesses still making money, reaping rewards, and people living in debt. Those extremes have got worse. And our manifestos were only bringing us up to the level of our sort of like European, sort of like France and Germany. And it's like, so where are we going to go from now? What are we going to offer to people for them to come towards Labour? I just don't know, which is why it's important for us to bring those policies to conference so that we can get them into whatever the new manifesto is going to be. Because I think it will come from the membership. These ideas will come from the trade unions, and they will come from the membership, because I just don't see where else that's going to be invented, unfortunately. I just don't see where that is coming from within the party. And like I said, they would have been transformational, and we just need to pick them back up and make them right for now, for the crises that we face now.
Yeah. I just wanted to end by, obviously people listen to this, and I think it's been fascinating, really interesting discussion. People might want to chip in. They might want to nudge you on issues. They might want you to bring things up. I know you've got a list as long as your arm, but I'm sure you welcome feedback and suggestions from people. I just wondered how, Nadia, first, like how do people get in touch with you if they want to feed into you?
So obviously via email is an easy way to get in touch. Obviously, I think we said this last time, Ben, we ought to just put out our contact details. But when you are contacting the party, and particularly the NEC, copy us in. We are your CLP delegates. We are there to ask your questions, to chase for those decisions. So just let us know when you are contacting the party. But I think one of the other things that we want to do is we want to make sure that we're doing member surgeries. And I think once PERD is out of the way, we'll be able to do that, and we'll obviously give members an opportunity to speak to us directly. But you can invite us to your CLPs, you can invite us to your branch meetings, we can come along to your AGMs, to your LCFs as speakers or observers. So get in touch with us, and we are happy to be involved, because like I said, we're the voice of the members. And people do get in touch with us already, absolutely. We get inundated with emails. But yeah, email is probably the easiest way to get in touch. But once we've started the member surgeries and we can get into a flow of those, I think that'll give members a face-to-face or on Zoom opportunity to speak to us directly.
Yeah, and by the way, Nadia has got a very good Twitter account which you should all follow, Ms. Jama with the Z. So make sure you follow her, and I'm sure she doesn't mind people getting in touch on Twitter as well with ideas and things like that.
And my email's in my bio. So
bio, brilliant. Okay, great. Howard, what about you?
Yeah, well, email, obviously, howard.beckett@unitetheunion.org. I think everybody sort of knows the Unite the Union emails. It's quite easy to follow. DM me on Twitter. I can be a little bit slow in getting back on Twitter, so anybody who DMs me, please to be patient with me, but I will get back to your DM. And similarly, as Nadia said, it's difficult to accept every invitation, but I have been talking to a number of CLPs, a lot of which has been addressing this issue that you raised with me, Ben, about the reality of politics affecting people's lives. And whenever you go to address the CLPs, you can be in no doubt about the need for a socialist mainstream party in politics. It's what we all need desperately. So.
Thank you very much, Howard, and thanks, Nadia. That I always think it's so refreshing to hear people just telling it as it is, and you both do that so well. So thank you very much. It's been a fascinating one tonight, and I'm sure we'll get lots of feedback and comments on Twitter as well. Okay, thank you very much. I'm gonna close the pub for tonight, and it's been great, and I really enjoyed it. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Ben. Solidarity, mate.
Yeah.